Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Thanks very much.
Now, the lady's not for turning. There will be no second vote, no staying in Europe by the back door. Theresa May has told her cabinet it's now up to the government to make Brexit a success. The Prime Minister gathered ministers for a day of talks at Chequers, telling them to come up with positive ways to deliver the next step in the process. So what could that mean in practice? And is this the final nail in the coffin for the Remainers? Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Ministerial black cars lined the drive at Chequers, the setting for the Cabinet's first wide-ranging discussion about Brexit. The pro-Leave campaigners are outnumbered more than 2 to 1 around this table. Just one reason why the pro-Remain Prime Minister feels she must repeat there's no turning back.
We must continue to be very clear that Brexit means Brexit, that we're going to make a success of it. That means there's no second referendum, no attempts to sort of stay in the EU by the back door. We're actually going to deliver on this.
Boris Johnson nodded his head. He's actually been a supporter of a second referendum in the past. The Prime Minister said she hoped the government would also focus on social reform. One cabinet minister she sacked on taking office said Brexit and the economy would dominate everything, whether she liked it or not.
But obviously over the summer, quite a lot of, the last few weeks, quite a lot of work has been done. We're going to be having an opportunity today to discuss this. We will have an update on Brexit. We'll be looking at the next steps that we need to take, but we'll also be looking at the opportunities that are now open to us.
Most of the Brexit discussion came in the afternoon when the civil servants had left the room. One after another, ministers outlined what opportunities Brexit presented for their departments. Theresa May told the Cabinet that she wanted to push ahead with formal notification of Britain's intention to leave the EU, Article 50, as it's called in the jargon. I understand that Theresa May believes, having said in public that she wanted that to happen early next year, in her mind that means January or February. Number 10 said that there was strong agreement amongst the Cabinet today that there was no need for a parliamentary vote ahead of that moment, and although Scotland and the other devolved administrations would be consulted, they would have no veto on the decision. Downing Street said there was agreement in Cabinet today that Britain needed controls on the numbers of people who come to Britain from Europe, but also a positive outcome for those who wish to trade goods and services. Quite how you marry those two remains an unknown. Likewise, whether the EU is up for that sort of deal. Cabinet ministers are now back in Whitehall, where 2 new departments sprang up over the summer, stealing desks and people off the Foreign Office and the Cabinet Office, either side of Downing Street. David Davis's department for exiting the EU has been squatting in 9 Downing Street, hot desking. It'll soon burst into offices of its own, probably just over the road in the old Department for Energy. Liam Fox's new Department for International Trade has stolen personnel and space off the Foreign Office, as Dr. Fox proudly boasted 5 weeks ago in an interview with an American Republican radio host.
My gosh, in thousands of people, it's got to be, is there a new Ministry of International Trade somewhere?
We are taking over a wing of what was, or what is at the moment, the Foreign Office. So we'll be based between Downing Street and the Foreign Office, and that's going to send an important signal.
Big money hirings from outside the civil service haven't really started yet, but when they do, international trade lawyers can retail at £5,000 a day and upwards. For now, though, the government's been able to pull in pro bono free help from big-name accountancy and consulting firms. Only too happy, it seems, to assist.
I think the big consultancy firms and accountancy firms and legal firms will all be trying to get their foot in the door and offer help to the civil service, because they can see that this could be a lucrative source of work for them further down the line.
And they get a lot of insights into what the government's planning, maybe in some influence.
Well, I think that the civil service will be keen to try and establish Chinese walls wherever appropriate. But yes, I think that the insight to be gained will not be of inconsiderable value to those firms.
Downing Street said the Cabinet didn't want to copy any existing arrangements non-EU countries have made with the EU. Britain should have a specially tailored agreement with the organisation it's now leaving.
Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP, Kwasi Kwarteng, who believes Britain should invoke Article 50 and Brexit quickly, and the Labour MP, Chuka Umunna, who campaigned for the UK to remain in the EU. Kwasi Kwarteng first. Theresa May was very clear. You must be very pleased.
I'm very happy. I think Brexit means Brexit. And people say, what does that mean? Well, I know what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean staying in the EU. It doesn't mean the status quo. It means actually listening to the vote and having the humility to try and, execute, as it were, the will of the people.
So, Chuka Umunna, it's all over, really, for the Remainers, isn't it?
Well, look, I accept the result. I mean, Brexit means Brexit is a ridiculous phrase. It's basically saying Britain leaving the European Union
means Britain leaving the
Absolutely
European Union. It does.
But it's meaningless. And what is extraordinary about it, it's taken 50 days, this is the 50th day of Theresa May's premiership, for her to bring the cabinet together to brainstorm on the biggest issue facing the country. And even more reprehensible is the fact that you have prominent Vote Leave campaigners like Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, Liam Fox, Priti Patel. All these people told us they knew what Brexit looked like before the referendum, and yet now they're having to brainstorm on it because they're clueless about what will happen
Chuka
next.
understands that there's Article 50 and it's a 2-year process. There's no point rushing into something without due preparation.
All right,
there's no point. We were in the EU for 43 years. That's longer than I've been alive. It's going to take a lot longer. I mean, people.
So you're happy for a lot more brainstorming before Article 50 is triggered?
What I'm saying is that Article 50 will be triggered very soon. But given
That's not what Theresa May said.
Well, in the next 6 months to a year, that's soon. Given the fact that we were in this thing for 43 years. I know people who've, if you're in a marriage for 4 years, it might take you 2 years to get out of it. We were in this thing for 43 years. Well, I mean, give us a break.
It's just common sense.
Well, look,
absolutely.
Well, I think it's very interesting, actually. Look, I'm with Kwasi in the sense that I think there's no rush whatsoever to invoke Article 50. It's interesting.
Except he said there is a bit of a rush. 6 months he'd like to see it.
Well, Kwasi, as a member of the government, has just said they're looking at invoking it between 6 months and a year. But to some extent, there's a bit of a debate as to whether the Prime Minister needs to come to Parliament to invoke that. I'm not sure she does. But never mind.
Really? So you don't want MPs to have a veto?
Well, look, in practice, MPs have to pay attention to the result.
I'm glad he said that.
Which, although it wasn't overwhelming, was a clear result. But
right, so no veto. Let's be absolutely clear.
I don't think that would be a good look for Parliament. The people have spoken. I think it'd be rather patronising to pretend that somehow we know better. However, look, it's not just about whether Article 50 is invoked or not. There's a huge amount of EU law which has been incorporated into UK law by dint of the European Communities Act 1972. I'm getting rather technical here, but basically it says that in certain areas, like employment rights, for example, EU law has primacy over domestic legislation. Now, that will need to be repealed, I suspect, but there's a number of things that flow from that, because if you look at some of the rights at work that people in this studio have, agency workers, for example, their right to equal treatment, that is based on laws arising from that 72 Act, which will fall away. So it isn't just about the deal that we reach with European Union partners. There is a huge domestic legislative job for Parliament to do.
That may be true, but when Chuka was mocking Brexit means Brexit, it's very clear to me that the status quo is unacceptable. And that's what Chuka has the decency to appreciate that. Not everyone on your side does. I mean, some of them are still rerunning the fight.
Okay, but when you say Brexit means Brexit, does it, for example, mean that access to the single market is dependent on the free movement of people?
For me, free movement of people is a red line. I will not. I will be quite prepared to walk away from the single market. We have to be in the negotiation. I mean, look what happened to Cameron. The fact that he got very little was predicated on the idea that he was not credible. No one thought he wanted to leave the EU. That's why he couldn't get a deal.
Do you accept that you won't get access to the single market and keep freedom? You can't have your cake and eat it on freedom of movement and single market.
I think that's right, but there are a number of people in Cabinet, many prominent members who were Vote Leave campaigners, who said we could maintain the kind of access that we have to the single market now, but avoid paying into the EU budget, and we wouldn't have to take the free movement with it. Now,
which is not what you said in the campaign.
No, I said during the campaign, look, part of the reason I don't think we should leave the European Union is because we want to maintain access to the single market, and I didn't think doing in our economy was the way to deal with the immigration challenges. But as Kwasi said, look, I accept that the people have spoken on the issue of free movement. What the Prime Minister is now going to have to try and do is square the circle of maintaining free access to the single market without us paying into the budget, and also without us accepting free movement as we know. And look,
that is the opposite of what you said in the campaign.
It isn't the opposite of what we said. In terms of the Stronger In campaign, part of the reason we said that you needed to stay in the single market was because one of the reasons we said free movement was going to be difficult to avoid was because vote leave campaigners were saying we maintain access to the single market. So I never pretended, look, we never said you could square the circle.
But what I'm saying is when Brexit means Brexit, that means a difference to the status quo. What Chuka and many people on his side are saying is that actually we're going to leave, but we're going to be the same. They're essentially reheating a dish, a meal that was rejected, and pretending that it's different. And that's not going to work. People are too
contradicting
too
yourself
smart to accept
You're
that.
contradicting yourself in this interview. You just said that I accept that we've got to move on from the status quo.
But many people on your side, I've said.
Well, they can
many
speak
people
for
on your
themselves.
side
They can speak.
Are saying that we're going to have exactly the same arrangement.
Well, well, clearly,
and I don't think that's acceptable.
But clearly, we're not, because we're going to be outside the European Union.
Okay,
but let's try and get the best deal for the British people that's a progressive one, that helps promote fairness, prosperity. We meet our climate change obligations. We continue to help tackle global poverty. Let us try and do those things with a close working relationship with them.
Very finally, it looks like Jeremy Corbyn is going to be re-elected with an increased mandate. Can you and he remain in the same party?
Look, the Labour Party is not going to split. I'm not going anywhere. So unless he is, I think we can, but I'm not going anywhere.
Chukwuemeka Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much for joining me.
Back now to Theresa May's pledge that she wants to make Brexit a success. Wales was one of the many parts of the country which voted to leave, even in places like Pontypridd, whose MP is Labour leadership contender Owen Smith. He's called for a second referendum on any Brexit deal, but not all his constituents agree. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Andy Davis.
No EU by the back door, said the Prime Minister, and on the streets of Pontypridd today, Leave voters liked what they were hearing. Among them, Jane, a greengrocer.
Yeah, that's good. Good news. I'm glad. But I want it to happen ASAP rather than next year. We're going to still be talking about it the year after. It should happen now.
Owen Smith, the Labour leadership contender, is the local MP here. He urged Remain, but a majority in this area, 53.7%, chose Brexit. And like Jane, many of those Leave voters we spoke to want it sooner rather than later.
And your message to Theresa May?
Get on with it. Get on with it, do it. Just get on with it. Don't, why in 2 years' time? You must get on with it now. The people's vote should count for something. We should count. We voted to leave. Why is this taking so long to get on? Just get on with it now. I think we should get on with it.
And you want Brexit now?
I want Brexit as soon as possible.
But what about Remain voters? Those who wanted to keep the European Union firmly embedded in the fabric of these valleys.
Now, this machine is an electrical discharge machine.
No surprise that Gareth Jenkins voted to Remain. His tool manufacturing business, he says, has probably benefited to the tune of £1 million in European funding over the years. His message to government: slow it down. Getting the best trade deals will take time.
I think ministers recognise that within the officialdom, we do not have the skill and the expertise and the people to negotiate trade deals. We haven't done it for 40 years. So just for that reason alone, we're not geared up to do trade deals. And that's going to take a couple of years at least before we get to that position.
So when should they trigger Article 50 and the formal talks?
About 2019 sounds good to me.
Of course, other businesses would hate the uncertainty such delay would bring.
140.
And adding to the complexity of it all, the contrasting visions of Brexit, dividing its proponents at ministerial level and beyond.
What do you think Brexit means?
Out of Europe, not paying them the money, keeping the money in this country.
Out of the single European market as well?
Yeah.
Out of everything?
Yeah. Back as we were.
There must be freedom of movement. I think there must be, yes. I'd have to go with that. Yep.
And you were a Leave voter, so...
yeah, I know.
Why are you saying it like that?
Well, I feel so. I'm contradicting myself in some ways.
But there's a lot of people voted like I did, but half of us didn't know what we were voting for. We just followed the rest of them.
But you're not clear on what you now want Theresa May to deliver?
No, I'm not. I'm not, mate. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I can't do anything about it.
And he certainly wasn't the only one we met today having difficulty with that one. Andy Davis, Channel 4 News, Pontypridd.
I've been getting away with it all my